Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Firefly Studios video. Aaron here with special guest Simon Bradbury. If you are wondering what's playing on your screen right now and weren't a fan of sort of 90s city builders, this is Caesar 3, which Simon actually worked on as a programmer.
Actually, well, I was the only programmer, Aaron.
Or the only programmer.
Couldn't afford two programmers in the 90s.
We are at Firefly working on a new online city builder called Romans Age of Caesar. So I thought it'd be a cool idea to sort of go back, watch some gameplay of sort of the Caesar 3, as you can see on screen right now, and taking a trip down memory lane and sort of discussing a bit about 90s game dev and differences between now and then. So I have got a few questions here for you, just as a little sort of jumping pads to get into more nitty-gritty details about 90s game dev and what we're doing nowadays.
Yep.
So we're ready to jump in with question one.
Absolutely.
Let's get to it. So while Demiath masterfully and skillfully manages his city, could you take us through what the reason behind visiting the Roman setting initially was for Impressions Games, and why you and the rest of the guys who were Impressions and now at Firefly seem to love Rome so much?
Yeah, we seem to like two things: medieval stuff and Roman stuff.
Yeah.
So, but they're two great periods of history. I mean, Rome is like such an amazing time when they had these armies that went around and like conquered the known world, but also then they actually went and made it work. So they brought civilization to it. So like they were, they had much more advanced cities than say the Middle Ages did. The Middle Ages had really not so good cities, and everyone was complaining that that you'd look back, I guess, and they used to have underfloor heating and also hot water and things like. Not anymore. 1,000 years earlier. So I mean, there's so much material in Rome, whether it's the water supply, whether it is heating. They were amazing engineers. They were using like concrete and things way before everyone else. And then we all forgot how to do it. And a lot of Roman buildings still stand today. Tells you like that. It's testament to how well they built stuff. So Rome has such a rich kind of like vein of things for us to kind of like mine and to get into strategically. Whether it's fighting, whether it's building, whether it's politics. It's such a wealth of material for a strategy game that I think it was just, you look at other periods of history and there's not quite as much, history in there to kind of.
It's a bit more sophisticated,
It's more sophisticated. It lasts a long time. They did a lot of memorable stuff.
Yes.
They would kind of like build amazing things, but they'd also, stab each other in the back a lot.
There's a bit of conflict there, which is always needed.
It's good, there's a lot of drama and there's a lot of epic history, which I think a lot of people can kind of easily identify with as well. I'm sure, like for example, like looking at the Inca civilization is very interesting and valuable, but how many films have you seen about it?
True.
People find it harder to relate to that stuff. Rome, most people will have seen at least one film with chariot racing in it or Gladiator.
Absolutely, yeah. It's very strong in the sort of the popular conscience, I believe Rome is.
Yeah.
This will be referencing directly to the gameplay here. So for fans of Caesar 3 and the other Caesar games, could you take us through anything on screen right now which may be making an appearance in Romans Age of Caesar?
Absolutely. So, obviously, I talked earlier about the housing and housing upgrades. I think we'll have actually a lot more than in Caesar had in terms of levels of houses, to go from humble shack to mighty imperial palace at the top, which requires everything from, cushions and, super luxuries that no one can do without.
Cushions are needed.
But a lot of the things on screen, you can see, so certain services you're required, like entertainment you have, and you can see there that this is a very impressive city, but there's lots of temples going on there in the middle. Some of those insulae are starting to sprout up, as I think that's what they are. It's been a few years. I think one of the differences is we'll be like the Colosseum you see there on the left will be something that you'll build up in stages in Romans. So you'll go to the city centre and there'll probably be like 50 levels of it, and you'll have to basically, everyone will have to donate stuff and build it together. So you won't just get, it's disappeared now, but you won't just get a big Colosseum like that instantly. You'll have to build it.
You have to work for it.
You have to work for it, exactly. But I mean, a lot of the same types of buildings will be there. It'll be about your houses. There'll be lots of people moving things around. People with carts will be moving things around. It will look similar in lots of ways, I think. And then I think where it'll go beyond just the obvious similarities on screen is on the Empire map, where I think we will do a lot more. There'll be a lot more strategy, a lot more kind of planning and intelligence gathering on there. Because these will be real people in real cities that are doing things against you, rather than a relatively rudimentary AI that would do predictable things. You'll go out there and there'll be a lot more politics. Beyond that, again, like I say, there'll be a new map, a political map, which we're not talking about yet, but that will have, this is something that Caesar didn't do, which is where you're fighting politically against the factions. And I think that's going to be a really, really fascinating new kind of feature, a new USP that I mean, no one's done before actually. So I am very excited about that.
If we were to compare it to something like, I don't know, Stronghold, was this the reason why you focus a lot more on city building and sort of, is a bit more relaxed in terms of, having so many, as we see here, so many different buildings and, different industries and systems that went into sort of a Roman city, or Rome itself, if you wanted to reference that. Is that why you focus more on city building in these sort of games rather than Stronghold, where it's a bit more sort of RTS action?
Well, actually, I'd say, I mean, in a way, I'd turn that question on its head and say that we did Stronghold following from the Caesar games in a way, because Stronghold is, in a way, not to hijack this video, but it's a combination of city builder and fighting. It's more so than most RTSs. Like if you take Age of Empires or StarCraft, they're all fighting, whereas Stronghold has a lot more city building in it, and so it comes from this heritage of city building, and we like a slightly more relaxed pace. I mean, I know Stronghold might not seem relaxed to most people, but for Caesar and for what we're doing with Age of Caesar, it's a more thoughtful process. You sit in there, you can kind of tweak your city, you can make adjustments to it, and it has a lot of depth to it. I mean, that's one of the nice things about city builders, is you never feel quite in control, but it doesn't matter because you've got time to tinker and to adjust. And I think that's the charm of a city builder. It's a lot of depth, and a lot of kind of complex systems all kind of coming together that you can manipulate.
To go more into the sort of the game dev sphere, could you tell us a bit about sort of what it was like working in the 90s as a game dev on the Caesar series, and what it's like comparing that to now with Romans Age of Caesar, sort of having your own company and self-publishing and all that sort of stuff?
But the tech itself, that's changed, immeasurably. I mean, before we could only do certain, you wouldn't try and achieve too many really big things, mainly because you'd end up with a really long compile time. And so you'd end up not coding very quickly because it would just take too long to actually compile. Nowadays, computers are so quick, you can compile almost instantly. You can attempt bigger things. The other big tech change, obviously, is that when we did Caesar for Impressions, it was a single player game, and that lived on your computer, possibly on floppy disks.
Ooh, floppy disks.
Although that's a limitation, right? But maybe later on a CD. Now it doesn't. Now it lives on servers in the cloud, and someone has to run those servers and fix them when they get broken and make sure they talk to each other, try and stop denial of service attacks, deal with kind of lots more, if all of a sudden if there's 10,000 people want to play at once, how do you deal with that? Exactly. There's so many technical challenges. So I don't do any of that, but I've had to kind of understand all of those systems. So when we're talking to people that are making those, we can kind of make right decisions. But before I could program Caesar as a single person. Nowadays, no chance.
Bit tougher,
Mainly because there are so many more techs involved. It's not just programming what you see in front of you bit, and the kind of the game runs on your computer. Now someone needs to program what you see, but someone also needs to program the game running on a server somewhere, and then lots of other people need to program the bits in between to make it all happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of coming at it from sort of more of a design point of view, so what are sort of the different design sort of workflows between programming a single player game or designing a single player game and designing a massive multiplayer online game?
I think where we diverge is Romans, you have 16 players in the same city, whereas in Caesar it's just you. A, and B, your city, when you turn your computer off, is still going, other people are still doing stuff. So someone whose amphitheatre you might have been relying on before, overnight has moved it somewhere else because, you know, it fits his city design better. All of a sudden that affects you. And also he might have come in and collected some of your stuff. It's good because you get the stuff as well, but so the way you position your stuff to, you know, attract other people to collect it, for example, is a really interesting one because you want other people to collect your goods because you get it at the same time. They're just collecting stuff for you while you're offline. But the game plays over days, weeks, months, years, and the game unfolds over that time. When you play a game like Caesar or most single player city builders, you're playing in a single play session. They can be quite long, you know, you could be playing 12 hours maybe even, but over several, you know, reloads. But essentially it's a contained thing. When you're designing for Romans, you need something that captivates people's imagination over a period of a year or more.
So much more longer term.
Exactly. So we have different variables that give you different goals at different times. So at certain points, you're just trying to get your housing to kind of the simple shack level. Maybe, you know, start to get trading. The next thing you're doing, you're starting to push back the barbarians, and then you're trying to get, you know, some simple services in. Then you're perhaps talking with other members of your city to start upgrading some of the communal city centre buildings, like maybe getting docks so you can get boats coming in faster, or starting to look at maybe the Circus Maximus to boost everyone's entertainment. Then you're pushing your way through to get out onto the Empire map and to start to peek around outside your city. And then things get a little bit more interesting because then you're starting to compete with other cities. Maybe after a few weeks, you're competing with other cities. These are all things with unfolding gameplay that you didn't quite get in Caesar. In Caesar, you got a much more perhaps intense single player experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here you'll get, it'll still be actually quite intense, I think, for an MMO, but the challenge is to make it still feel interesting and kind of strategic and different when you're playing it 6 months later.
Yeah, well, I think it's super interesting because in a game like Caesar, as you said, it's a single-player, self-contained experience, which, you know, is designed and has a narrative or like a general narrative to it. But then in something like Romans Age of Caesar, when you introduce like it to the massive multiplayer online world, it's a bunch of different players making their own narratives and sort of like, you know, creating these conflicts for you and your friends in your certain districts against, you know, against sort of rival cities. There'll
be I think initially into city conflict, and then into alliance conflict, and then finally into house conflict when really it becomes all about politics and the Senate and who's going to be emperor. There's going to be a lot of backstabbing and fighting. But I think what we're hoping to be able to do is, I think a little this time around, is allow people to build a little bit more. If they want to, you can get involved much more heavily in the building and the politics maybe and the trading, and not so much the fighting. Or if you want to, you can get involved in the fighting, either pushing back the barbarians who will be constantly at the door, at the gates rather, or fighting against other rivals, you know, for the same resources.
So that was our little viewing session, our little Q&A of Caesar 3 here. Hopefully you had some fun, Simon, going back to
I did. It was a remembrance of times past.
Good. That's what I aim to do with these videos. If you do want to register for or pre-register even for our new online city builder, Romans Age of Caesar, then you can head to playromans.com right now. All you need to do is enter your email and you can pre-register there. You might even get into one of our early alpha tests. Of course, if you do want to stay up to date on our other projects, Stronghold Next and Stronghold Kingdoms, then make sure you hit that subscribe button. Also, a like would be appreciated by hitting that like button down below. And of course, we'll see you next week for another Firefly Studios video, Thursday at 3 p.m. See you next week.